Carla del Ponte, thanks for joining me on UpFront. More than a year ago, you resigned in protest from the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic, a special investigative committee set up by the UN. You said that you were frustrated, that you gave up, that there is no justice for Syria, you said. Why is that, and who do you think is to blame?
First of all, I confirm what you are saying. Yes, I resign in protest because the Security Council is guilty on this situation, because the Security Council did not take a decision to put in place a tribunal ad hoc or to refer to the Permanent Criminal Court. So in Syria, after 6 years in the Commission, trying to obtain a justice for the victims, and it was not possible. Nobody is listening to us, to the Commission, and in Syria is still total impunity.
When you said that the UN Commission was not backed by any political will, for example, which countries on the Security Council were you referring to? Which countries specifically lacked the political will that you were looking for?
Oh, it's well known. It is Russia. First of all, it's Russia and China. And Russia uses a veto right, so they stopped each resolution that want to put in place an international tribunal. It was not possible. It is still not possible, because Russia is still putting an obstacle to each decision to obtain justice for the victims.
Isn't there a bit of a contradiction, though, when we hear you talk about Russia? Because right now you're saying Russia is to blame. But in 2016, when the Russians were intervening in Syria, bombing in Syria, tilting the war in favor of Bashar al-Assad, you praised it. You said it was a good thing that Russia had intervened because, quote, someone is attacking these terrorist groups. What is your position on Russia and the Syrian war? Because you seem to be all over the place.
You know, you must make a difference between the military, the justice point, the military point, the political point. So if you see Russia now, Russia is probably trying to obtain a peace accord in Syria, as we know from the press. But military, it was at that time, I don't know, not now when, that Russia was helping the regime of Assad, and it was fighting against terrorism. You have other reports of this commission that you can read, that Russia is responsible for civilians' death, and that is another episode.
I understand the point you're making. You're saying separate them out. They can intervene to fight terrorism and kill civilians at the same time. I'm saying, but you, as someone who's sitting on a UN commission at that time, do you regret making those comments? Because at the moment you made those comments in February 2016, at that time Amnesty was criticizing Russia for bombing civilian targets. How can you investigate war crimes while praising a party that's accused of war crimes?
You know, I disagree with you totally. I disagree with you totally.
Okay.
Because it is a war is going on 7 years now, and in these 7 years you have a different attitude from the parties who are fighting this war, and particularly the Commission of Crimes against humanity and war crimes. So if I'm speaking as former prosecutor, I must telling you total impunity in Syria, and that is unacceptable. And Security Council is a guilty institution of that. If I'm speaking about a member of the Commission, because the Commission is violation of human rights, and not each violation of human rights is a crime. So you can describe in these reports that we present to the Council of Human Rights, we described what happened in reality.
Okay.
And that
you said at the time that Russia's intervention was justified because finally someone is attacking these terrorist groups. But as you know, the Assad government has labeled just about everyone who isn't on the side of the regime a terrorist. Weren't you worried that that kind of language from you, a member of the Commission, would give a green light to Syria and to Russia to escalate their bombardment?
No. Nobody from the Commission, and not me, is given green light to the Russian to bombard. Absolutely not. Russian intervene with Assad regime against terrorist group, particularly ISIS, Daesh, and that for me was absolutely positive.
On May the 6th, 2013, following a chemical attack in Syria outside of Aleppo 2 months earlier, you said we have no indication at all that the Syrian government has used chemical weapons and that according to what we have established so far, it is at the moment opponents of the regime who are using sarin gas. Ever since you said that, supporters of the Assad government have used your quote to suggest it's the rebels who are carrying out all the chemical attacks, not the Assad government. Does that bother you, and do you still stand by that statement?
I absolutely stay on that statement because that also, you see, it was at the beginning of the use of chemical weapons. So, in one interview I said the first elements of evidences that we have is that the rebels have used chemical weapons. Since then, the Commission established that the regime used chemical weapons. Yes. But we were not able to investigate, and we were not allowed to investigate, unfortunately, because until today you don't know exactly who used what of chemical weapons.
But that's not what you said at the time. You said we have no indication it was the government. Hold on. You said it is at the moment opponents of the regime who are using sarin gas.
At that time.
But the UN disowned your comments at the time on that very day. The UN said at the time, we wish to clarify the Commission has not reached any conclusive findings on the use of chemical weapons. Did you speak too soon because your own UN colleagues disowned your remark at the time?
It's true that my colleagues were not happy about that, but I think that if you tell the truth, it's the best attitude that you can have. And as former prosecutor, I know that. So, at the beginning of the use of chemical weapons, the only elements we have of evidence were that the rebels used it. Since then, we have many other episodes, and we could establish, the Commission could establish that the regime used chemical weapons, the rebels used chemical weapons, regime in more episodes than the rebels. But what I want to tell you is that it is a shame that the international community, and in particular the Security Council and the UN, don't do nothing to establish exactly who are responsible for the use of chemical weapons.
Before Syria, you were called the world's most powerful criminal lawyer. You were working as a prosecutor for the International Tribunals on war crimes in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Slobodan Milosevic famously attacked you as the new Gestapo, I think he called you. You sent some of the worst criminals of the 20th century to prison. Why was justice possible in Rwanda and in the Balkans, but not in Syria?
Because the Security Council didn't want that, because it's the Security Council who don't want that justice is also in Syria for the victims. Because former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, Security Council unanimity decided to constitute an international tribunal and to deal with the crimes that were committed, war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide. But unfortunately, it is a political decision from the Security Council who allowed an international institution, a tribunal ad hoc, to obtain justice for the victims. The weak point is that it is a political decision.
But those decisions are made not just by governments, they're made by prosecutors. You once expressed a willingness to press charges against NATO personnel for alleged war crimes in 1999. In December 1999, you told The Guardian you were up for that. NATO had broken the Geneva Conventions. Then 6 months later, you changed your mind. You did a 100% U-turn and said, NATO didn't do anything wrong, you're not going to investigate them. Why did you do that U-turn?
I did not. We open an investigation when we have concrete element of evidences. And we had one element, I remember very well. It was a bombardment from an American pilot on a civilians convoy. And the pilot said, I see they are civilians, and he received the order to bombard. And 120 civilians were killed. We opened an investigation, but it was not possible to conduct this investigation to the end. That's the reason why we were not able.
But this is what you said in June 2000. There is no basis for opening an investigation into any of the allegations. Although some mistakes were made by NATO, I'm very satisfied that there was no deliberate targeting of civilians.
About what? About...
You said, although some mistakes were made by NATO, I'm very satisfied there was no deliberate targeting of civilians. But human rights groups don't agree with you on that.
I don't know which episode you are recalling.
You were referring to the war in general. You said during... No, I'm quoting you. Carla, I'm quoting you. You said, let me quote you again.
No, the war in general. I'm not speaking about the war in general.
But you were in 2000. You said, I'm very satisfied.
Never.
There was no deliberate targeting of civilians by NATO during the bombing campaign. But human rights groups disagree with you. You disagreed with you 6 months earlier.
I disagree what you are saying. You are not correct in what you are referring that I am speaking about.
Okay, let me ask you now then, since you're disagreeing with your quote. Do you believe that NATO only made mistakes during its bombing campaign of Kosovo and there were no potential war crimes worth investigating? What's your position? You tell me.
I have only one investigation. I opened just one investigation about the responsibility of NATO committing crimes. But I could not end this investigation and issuing an indictment.
Why?
Because it was not possible to collect the evidence because the states are refusing to cooperate with the tribunal. Ecco, why? What is it? Because, and it is not the only. Although in other cases we could not end our investigation because it was not able to collect enough evidences to issue an indictment. That is the task of a prosecutor.
Okay, so to be clear then, they may have committed war crimes, it's just you were not able to investigate it fully. It's not that they're innocent of war crimes, it's that you were prevented from investigating them in a full way. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Last question then.
Exactly.
Do you think it's possible that a president of the United States or a prime minister of the UK could ever be brought in front of a war crimes tribunal, or is that a pipe dream? Is that a fantasy?
Theoretically, it's possible. Under the international law, it's possible. But in practice, practical, it's not possible. Because as I told you, international justice is possible only if the political will is in existence. But we must fight to obtain justice for all the victims of the war crimes, crimes against humanity, by the high responsible, political and military responsible for the commission of these crimes. But of course, the ideal situation is far away from now, particularly now, I must say.
Carla del Ponte, thanks for joining me on UpFront.
Okay.